Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Freddie Lawton from Business Review, and I will be your host. It is our pleasure to have HP with us today, who will be discussing how to adapt to the creative opportunities of digital print. Today's guest speaker is Silas Amos, who is a design strategist. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar platform On24. You'll notice that this webinar is browser-based, so if you disconnect for any reason, please just click on the link that you receive via email to rejoin the session. In order to ask questions, you can send them in via the questions widget. Just type them into the box at the top left-hand corner of your screen and click submit. We will allocate around 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the session to address any questions or thoughts that you may have. If you click on the survey widget, there are a few questions in there for you to answer in order to provide feedback. You can do this during or immediately after the webinar. Please use the yellow help widget if you require any assistance, and you can move, resize, and maximize any of the windows in front of you to get a better view of the slides. But now, please allow me to welcome Silas.
Hello, everybody. Thanks very much for joining. So I'm looking forward to talking to you today around the creative opportunities and the business opportunities which I believe digital print are affording us all. Just to explain perhaps a little piece of context for myself, I've been working in FMCG packaging design personally for something like 24 years. And I'm very excited, really. When I started to grapple with what digital print could do, it made me realize how the industry I work in is fundamentally changing, how it's going to be a lot more fun, how it's going to give me a lot more opportunity to be creative over the next, hopefully, decade and a half or so of my career. So that got me inspired, and so that's where I ended up talking with HP a lot. And so I guess to some degree today is an opportunity for me to pass on some of the thoughts I've had about how I believe the world's changing, really from a personal perspective as much as anything else, but also with a hope that it's going to actually offer you guys some inspiration or some thoughts or some ways to actually utilize this new technology in effective ways. So I think the topic is billed is adapting to the creative opportunities of digital print. Personally, a lot of the examples I'm using here have come from HP because I've worked a lot with them, but it's how the entire technology in the medium is changing the way that we can all behave and utilize things. So what I wanted to talk about are some of the new challenges which are facing us all in business and as brand builders and such like, some of the new approaches which are opening up, the new environment that we're therefore working within and have to adapt to, and the new opportunities that exist within that environment. And I'm going to try and offer some smart ways that we can potentially evolve and ways in which we can actually change the way we conduct ourselves in order to make the most of these opportunities. So I don't know about you guys, but for me, I sometimes feel quite overwhelmed by the pace of technological change, all of the new things I'm expected to keep up with every day. And when you read a copy of Wired magazine or the financial pages or pretty much anything, you sometimes feel like we're in a completely different world to the one many of us grew up and first learnt our business practices within. So it's a little bit like the Wizard of Oz. It feels sometimes like you wake up and you're in this whole new, somewhat challenging world where you have this kind of quest to get to, as Dorothy did, Emerald City, but how on earth are we going to do that? It can feel like a daunting journey that we're on. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. There's a number of things which are fundamentally changing the environment in which we're all working. And it's not one thing or another thing. It's a convergence, in my mind's eye, of three big drivers which are changing the way that brands are behaving and the way that technology is accelerating that change. So fundamentally, within this convergence, there are three attributes to it. Brands are moving from the old days where they tried to build awareness to a model where they try to build more engagement and be more emotional. The media, we are now, of course, overwhelmed by different ways in which the media operates, so there's almost a saturation and overchoice, but fundamentally, in the old days, television advertisements would have cut through. Now they don't, and so we have a more 360 media model in which brands, branding, and print all play a role. And finally, production. Certainly within the packaging realm, production has always traditionally been very slow. When I take on a project, people will be talking about launching it maybe quarter 18 right now. In other words, there's long lead times, and yet the world is moving ever faster. And so digital print is one part of how the technology is enabling us to speed up to keep pace with the shift of life. So those are the three broad things driving the change, I believe, for many of us. And I'm just going to talk to those one by one. So first, if we talk to the way that brands are moving from awareness to engagement, and of course I'll come back on this to talk about the implications of digital print. If we look at the history of branding from the era of guilds, to literally branding cattle, to the birth of brands in the late 19th century, to early advertising, to the more sophisticated advertising of the Mad Men era, to today, where strategy is such a driver and such a buzzword, one sees an overarching shift into emotional engagement. It's not just about credibility or reason to trust. It's about an ever more emotional, engaging scenario that we're working within. And so within this, if brands and the design and communication of brands is trying to be more emotional and to catch us in a more engaged way, of course it has to be more agile, it has to be richer, it has to change more, it has to reach out to us. It can no longer simply be a good, strong label on a pack or the cover of a book. It needs to give us more, and agility is one of the things which digital print is offering up, which enables that. The second thing which is really changing is this sense of the media shift from television to 360. Broadly speaking, all of us are receiving something like 5,000 media messages a day. Now, clearly, none of us are really registering that. We're screening out from them. We don't watch the television. We go and make a cup of tea while the advertisements are on. Or we don't bother to read the advertising in the newspaper or look at the poster or the banner ad on our iPad. Fundamentally, all of these messages are around us in our atmosphere, but we're not necessarily registering them as once we did with television. So this, of course, gives marketeers trying to promote their brands a huge challenge. The one thing we could observe within this is that packaging has become much more important than it used to be. It is no longer the vessel for the product, it is the vessel for the idea. It's the last interruptive media. And what I mean by that is that, much like Alice here with her Drink Me bottle, if you want to get to the product inside the vessel, you have to go through the packaging. It is one thing we cannot screen out in the way we could a TV advert or a radio advert or a banner ad. So packaging is starting to adopt the role of communication in a way it never has before. This is interesting because packaging's always had a hard job to do in terms of being achieving standout, navigability and relevance, and now it also has to add this layer of idea without in any way distracting us from the way that packaging works effectively by being seen, noticed and chosen. I think the other thing to observe today is that we no longer live in a world which is just about analog packaging and then the internet. Packaging has to work with all of the other media, be it TV, radio, press or online. And if it isn't working with other media, then it isn't really working at all. And I'll return to this to talk about how digital print can enable packaging to more actively engage with other channels. And so finally, within these three areas of the drivers of change, we've got the sense of production moving to a faster place. And this is certainly what's excited me and got me involved with digital print and trying to prototype things. We came from an era of faithful reproduction. Henry Ford's industrial production line and his famous quote, "Any colour so long as it's black." Most of us, our experience of print will tend to be about faithfully achieving brand colours and never deviating from them, and everything being about consistency. That is still true and it's still important, but within this faithful reproduction there is now actively faithless reproduction, a sense of variety, a sense of packs which can be unique, a sense of everyone is different. And this is one way of driving this engagement process that all branding seems to be moving towards. So we've moved from the faithful reproduction of things to a more faithless reproduction. And of course the agility of digital print to offer more diverse looks and feels to each pack is a helpful driver of that. For me personally, and apologies for anyone on this webinar who is technically minded, I am not. I can only see the creative and business potential in this. So the way that I see, having been shown many times the inside of a digital printer and how it works, and I kind of understand it, but romantically to me, what it's about is painting with light, because it uses lasers and molecules. I came from an era where we printed with metal plate. If you made a typographic mistake on the artwork as a young person when you arrived at the printers, it was a nightmare. You couldn't change it, or changing it was a big deal. Now, because we're printing with light, everything can be very fluid, and therefore the amount of effort you're prepared to put into the generation of artwork can be richly rewarded in the diversity, richness and complexity of what's coming off the other end. So for me, I don't believe that technology should be the driver here, but this is a great new paintbrush to play with and to try things out with. And so long as it serves a big idea, then I think it can potentially really move businesses forward. I came from an era in packaging, as I've said, which it always felt like almost like you were the captain of a large supertanker. Everything is very, very slow in that business in terms of from the brief to the research to the final design to the shop shelf can take a matter of years. And in those years, the rest of the world has moved on. So although you're making a small turn on the wheel driving this ship, and it makes a big difference to the direction you're going in, nothing is quick within it. And then along comes digital print, and suddenly it has the agility and to some degree pleasure of almost driving a speedboat. It's much more nippy, as we would say in the UK. Now, clearly, if you were to drive a brand that's typically been a supertanker as if it's a speedboat, there's a good chance you're going to have an accident. So I believe that the rules, so to speak, of piloting the vessel, which is a brand, are changing, and we have to think about ways that we can responsibly continue to grow the brand and not merely be tactical with digital print, but ultimately serve the big idea and the big strategy that sits behind any decent large-sized brand. I think within all of this, there is also an appetite for change and new news from the millennial generation. Time magazine describes them as entitled narcissists who still like to live with their parents, which is a funny way of putting it. But fundamentally, these young people are expecting more. They like to think of themselves as individuals, unique, almost celebrities in their own right. How do you make a narcissist feel good? You give them something unique and special which only they own. And I think that is one of the great attributes which digital print can do, whether it's in publications or packaging or other lines of communication, is to tailor things more tightly to the individuals that they're selling them, you are selling things to. So it's a great opportunity to do that. And of course, things like data and the like can also play a role in doing that. And we've got this thing, as you might have noticed, called the Internet. This is actually a photograph of a map of the Internet. We live in a connected world where everything joins up, where none of us go through life without touching digital the whole time. So digital print is just one way to connect the packaging in the hand or the book in the hand to the digital. I don't believe we're in a world where we need to make a choice between those two things. Consumers typically don't. We only live in one world. Nevertheless, that world needs to sort of see the best of what print can do. For example, people can remember facts much better by reading a printed page than reading a screen, but also the best of what digital can do to augment it. So there's opportunities really to hybrid coming up, I believe. And as we said, a lot of this is about a world of individuals who all like to feel unique and all like to feel like they have nothing in common with anyone else. So I've set out a picture of a completely different world that we're moving to, which has gone from one of almost industrialized regularity of production to something which is much more flexible, fluid, changeable, and targeted. And yet, if we were to look at this painting by Edward Manet, The Bar of the Folies Bergère, from, I think, 1878, as memory serves, we'll see here this lady at the bar is surrounded by beer bottles, and actually, they haven't changed much in all those years. So if we zoom in on the bottom right-hand corner, here is a painting of a bottle of Bass. It's a label with a logo on a glass bottle. So things haven't changed that much, have they? Things can still have the scope to change a great deal more than they already have. And to a degree, I think the world of branding, both in print and pack, is playing catch-up with the speed of cultural development which is happening online. And happily, digital print is one way of allowing us to do that because it's fast because you can experiment quickly with it and you can try things out. So there is an element of jeopardy to all of this. This is a picture of Charles Darwin, who obviously came up with the theory of evolution. As he said, the survival of the fittest, which is fundamentally what drives evolution, that is predicated on not being the strongest or the smartest. It's predicated on being the one who has the most ability to change and adapt. Those are the species which triumph. And we are in a changing environment. There's no doubt about that. And so the first thing I would say is that we all need to figure out ways to adapt our business, adapt our creativity, adapt our processes to make the most capital out of this new context in which we all live. And I guess the rest of this talk, to some degree, is about ways to do that. So we're now, I'm sure you're happy to hear, past the philosophical stage of this talk and now into the practical. I want to talk about 5 ways that I would suggest anyone doing branding can adapt to the new rules and the new opportunities and make something of them for themselves. And so the first way I would suggest we can adapt is to embrace a culture of experimentation. I believe that one of the most difficult things most people face at the moment in terms of grasping the digital opportunity in print is that procurement are yet to see a return on investment. Nobody's been tasked with this job specifically to exploit digital print. And so, to some degree, while there are great experiments out there to be had, it's nobody's remit or day job or responsibility. And even if you had a personal passion for it, it might not be what your month's salary or your end-of-year bonus is based upon, because people haven't grasped yet quite the commercial return that can come from experimentation. So if you were a brand manager looking to actually get a little trial going, how would you go about that? I think that Coca-Cola is a great example. These name packs began really off the radar in Australia as a way of reconnecting with a lapsed younger drinker. At the time that these bottles were first done, the brand manager that produced them was actually disciplined by Atlanta head office for getting the red slightly wrong. It was only subsequently that everyone woke up to the fact that this was a phenomenal engagement strategy and sales success. Getting the red right became the mission, and then this has been rolled out across Europe, into the Americas, and so on and so forth. And so it began with a magic words pilot scheme, and then that pilot scheme ultimately was something in units of hundreds of millions. However, pilot scheme are the words to hold here. Rather than saying you're going to change everything to your procurement or your boss, talk about pilot schemes, talk about small runs, talk about agility, which digital print through its short runs can achieve. Test the waters, prove that there is a market for the idea, and then move forward into a more industrial footing and a more industrialized scale of it, I would argue. The same thing happened with Coca-Cola when they did Diet Coke. So originally, over in Israel, these unique packs, which were done through HP Mosaic software, which effectively takes something like 40 patterns, and then the software changes them so that no one bottle is the same as another, which of course is a very engaging thing for a Diet Coke drinker with such a huge global brand to have a unique version of the pack. These were done at a small level in Israel. Lessons were learned. If there were mistakes to be made, they were made at a manageable level. And having learned from all of that, of course, it then goes on to be, again, a large success within the United States and around the world in the way that it's seen as a big integrated campaign that has come off an initial pilot scheme. Also, this doesn't have to be about giants like Coke. Irn-Bru is probably, it's Scotland's national drink. It's one of the few places where Coca-Cola isn't the leading soft drink. Irn-Bru is this fizzy, teeth-rotting orange drink, which is as Scottish can be. And so we as a pilot scheme with HP, we looked for Irn-Bru at using the tartans of all of the different clans, because I'm sure you're aware that within Scotland there are something like 54 clans, the McTavishes, the McSweeneys, whatever, and they all have different coloured tartans. So we put all of those tartans on the pack. We launched it as a very small launch around Hogmanay in the new year, which Scotland celebrates with gusto. And as you can see, there was an immediate spike of sales growth and website traffic This has won awards now for return on investment through design. It was a very, very easy thing. We rang up the client, gave them the idea. They liked it over the phone. We drew it up. The artwork was done within about 2 weeks, and prototypes were coming off the line onto pallets within probably 3 to 4 weeks. So you can have a quick idea and get it to market and experiment with gusto with this opportunity, so you don't have to be Coca-Cola to achieve it. Now, I think that within business, and certainly within marketing, failure, of course, is a dirty word. Nobody wants to fail. This is a picture of Sam Beckett, the playwright. He had a great quote: try, fail, try again, fail better. I think there is no opportunity to fail with large launches unless you want to jeopardize your own career or indeed the brand you work for. But the opportunity with digital is to produce small little bursts of potentially much more exciting, much more edgy creativity, and see whether that more provocative approach can work on a micro level. And if it does, then you can think about how you would scale it up to a bigger launch. Clearly, most creativity that goes out as a nationwide or global launch tends to be very safe, because safe carries little risk. The trouble is, with safe creativity, it also carries little interest for the consumer. So we need to be more provocative with what we do in communication, and one way to test the water of that is tiny micro pilot schemes. It can also relate to behavioral economics. So if you're not familiar with the phrase behavioral economics, this is really all about how you can actually give different messages and see what the reaction is from the consumer. So in hotels where you're asked to hang up the towel, they will have done experiments where they'll say, please hang this one up, people in the room before you did it. And that might be the trigger phrase that gets more people to hang up the towel. So you can do the same thing with pack or with print, where you can try different ways of doing the copy to see and experiment with what might be more salient and successful for your consumer. I think the final part of all of this sense of experimentation, is do it. 80% of success is showing up, as Woody Allen said. And to some degree, we need to be mindful of just not watching other people be successful and try and copy them, but try and be ahead of the curve. We all have an opportunity to lead right now. So the second thought around how to adapt is to be specific. And by specific, I mean that we now live not in one big connected planet, but we're all individuals. Time is specific. So you can see how Oreo cookies do real-time advertising, but they don't do real-time packaging. They're topical, but not within pack, and they could be with the agility of digital print. You see multimedia campaigns such as the one which relaunched Old Spice, where it was real-time advertising on YouTube, but the pack hadn't changed because it would have taken so long. Now it could keep pace. So specifically, we can now use time as one of our mediums for communication. Here are some bottles produced for Japan, running newspapers on the side of them to advertise the whole proposition to a younger audience of reading newspapers, and then this related to QR codes and such like. But specificness isn't just about lots of things done fast. It can be about using data in intelligent ways. This clothing catalogue, which came from Holland, this basically takes the data of the people already on the database, and if you happen to be a guy and tall, it's not going to, within the clothing catalogue, send you pictures of short, stumpy fat people or women or whatever. It will just give you the clothes it already knows you sort of like. So from a big 300-page catalogue, you can slim it right down to a precise, targeted, individual one of just a few dozen pages, which is much more relevant to the audience. This is an example of billboard advertising from Paris for smart cars. Parking a car in Paris is difficult. Smart car, being a small car, picked up on that. But rather than just saying it's easier to park in Paris with our car, they produced a number of different billboards which related to the areas they were put up. So a joke about the Arc de Triomphe, or a joke about the left bank, or whatever it was. And so they did something like 400 executions through digital print, all of which related specifically to the site on which they were on. So again, this is a sense of not just doing the same answer everywhere. It can also be, in specificness, about small premium runs of a product. These Alphen Barrel spirits from Diageo are tiny runs of almost what's left after everything else has been done. So they're just for the connoisseurs. So they're small runs made to look very, very premium and use digital printing along with analog finishing. to create some really spectacular packaging and using design and digital print as a creative tool. So we've talked about being specific, and the counterpoint to that is to be limitless. And I would suggest that one thing to hold in our minds with digital print is that these opposites clash and create something interesting. So to have limitless and yet specific thinking is one way into it. But to explain what I mean by limitless, here is the Bud Light packaging from the United States last year, where they took something like 40 patterns and put it across 200,000 cans. And I think that the pictures that appeared on social media speak for themselves. This is PAC as media. This is the PAC being part of the party rather than merely a sponsor of the party and getting into the spirit of the events in which they were associated. And this is priceless media, all through the medium of interesting packaging. This sense of limitlessness through mosaic technology, which HP can do, here's a great example, I think, from Korea. This is a cigarette pack where they produced 5 million, I believe, different individual variants of this pack. That's a fairly spectacular pilot run, I have to say. But you can see that they're fun, they're interesting, they're engaging. It isn't just for pack that mosaic works. Here are some calendars done in the same way. So it's just to point out that mosaic as a technology can work on corrugate, carton, or label or print, because it's a software thing which then just runs through the printers. I think the other thing about being limitless is to not think of the pack or the book or the advert as one thing that stands alone. It's about the limitlessness of integration. So Pepsi are launching this campaign this summer where they're using lots of different emojis, doing different things on different packs. So there'll be limitless emojis, but it will join up in a limitlessly integrated way with press, online, and all of their other strands of activity. And it's joining up the dots to make something bigger. So the fourth way to adapt is to use the new formats in creative ways. This isn't just about labels. It drives me personally mad that everyone seems to think the only thing we can now do with digital print is write people's names on bottles. There is a lot more to it. For example, here is the incredible art installation, digitally printed by Barbara Kruger for Oxford Museum of Art. But this could be your pop-up shop. And of course, this could relate to your ongoing campaign or your packaging or such like. So digital print can be giant. And equally, digital print can be apparel. This is Stella McCartney for Adidas, digitally printed. And equally, it can be about interactive. So these are packs for Oreo where consumers colour them in online and then have them delivered as gifts. Or indeed, they get sent to you and you can colour them in yourself. But this is co-creation where effectively you can move the little iconography elements around and create your own design. So it's a creative use of the packaging medium. And of course, we then move into the personalization, the sort of thing where we curate our own lives and create our own books of our own history. So this is a great example, I guess, of how you can actually be imaginative with formats. Here's how Stella McCartney's perfume appeared online, and here it is digitally printed in different patterns as a real thing. So it's an imaginative use of online imagery into analog pack. Here, I don't actually have a picture of the pack, but Iceland, the UK retail store, did a great piece of creative use of their medium when they had a sausage packaging ready to go in conventional print. And very surprisingly for the UK, we suddenly had some sunshine in the sky. Barbecues were getting rolled out into gardens, and Iceland managed to beat all their competition by getting their new sausages to market with an incredibly fast turnaround by using digital print as a stopgap to react to this unexpected change in the weather creatively. I think there's another interesting thing coming up for us as a business in terms of marketing, packaging, retail and the like, which is that subscription shopping is becoming massive. This idea that brands curate for us and then send us through the letterbox little sort of monthly timed parcels of their goodies. Clearly, if this box looks the same year after year endlessly, it would get very boring very quickly. And if you're a fan of a brand and want to have surprise and delight every time this thing comes through the door, this whole medium would be brilliant if it used digital printing to keep ringing the changes and keep things fresh and keep surprising people on the eye. And of course, it doesn't need to scream about the brand because you've ordered it online and it's coming through the post anyway. So in other words, make the experience richer. And I think we're starting to see a bit of that with what Amazon are doing. Although it wasn't digitally printed, I believe, this is a great example of how Amazon are starting to almost use their packaging as media or selling it as a canvas for media for others. And so I think in this world where a lot of things come to our door now, it's a great opportunity for digital to make things more imaginative, make things more creative and engaging, because we don't have to work to the old rules of pack. I think in life, and this next chart is one that I stole from Ian Schofield, who works at Iceland. He talks about the pressure in life that his clients within his business, because he's in the business of getting packaging to shelf, are asking for quicker turnaround, shorter shelf life, smaller batches, and ordered on a lower budget. And yet, on the same meeting, they will also ask for more additions, more new news, more variety, and more noise, more activity. And the short run of digital print is his way of achieving all of this, of just using smallness as a creative advantage so that he keeps changing his runs and reacts to change around him. Finally, I think within these principles of adaptation, digital print does not stand alone. It has to connect to the wider digital world in which we're all inhabiting. So, for example, from HP, they have software called Link. So you'll be familiar with invisible QR codes. With Link, these digital watermarks can be personalized. So, in other words, the message coming to your phone about the security of this thing or such like can be personalized and different to the one going to anybody else's, and it's another way of capturing data. So here's a great example of an analog pack relating to how the online QR code, which is invisible, can increase supply chain efficiency, protect against counterfeiting, make things more engaging pre and post sale, and ultimately create a unique code for each item, which then becomes part of its history and can have wider ramifications. I think also we're seeing a lot of what people are calling virtual reality or augmented reality within packaging now and within print, where there's almost this layer between us and the object. So IKEA do it with their furniture catalogues. Here's a McDonald's box where you can look through your camera and a little farm comes to life. I think the point here is that packaging and such like always used to be the end frame of a TV ad. You'd have a story and then you'll have a picture of the pack. Now we're in a world where the pack is the doorway through which the world comes through to us, through our phones and such like. And so packaging is now the establishing shot of a piece of communication rather than the end frame. And so I believe we need to start thinking about it differently and its role within that as an ability to communicate and act as a doorway for content. This is a slide about the Internet of Things. I don't know about everyone on the call, but I find the Internet of Things quite confusing. What it really means is sentient packaging. It's like the tag on a cow's ear tells you where it came from and where it's going. It makes it trackable, traceable, and interactive. So if we've lost our house keys, the Internet of Things can tell us where they are in the house or such like, which is all great, but it can be very low-tech too. So we can, through phones, triangulate a relationship between ourselves, a pack, and our phones. And so let's say your phone recognizes the pack tells your phone to tell you that you're on with your training regime for Dove Men & Care, and your training regime is different and tracks differently to anyone else's. This doesn't need any inbuilt technology within the pack. It's just the ink, and behind it is the watermark, which makes this Internet of Things. But given that, there are all sorts of opportunities to use the Internet of Things and connect it to digital print and its flexibility. I don't even know what or why or how. I just know that's going to happen and it's going to be interesting. So I think it's a watch this space thing. We also are seeing online retail changing. So I've done some experiments with Unilever where we've simplified packaging and seen sales results go more strong as a result of that in terms of the JPEGs which appear in online retail. The reality now, though, is that we can create purer branding online and deliver purer branding through home delivery, through digital. So how does online retail drive and relate to digitally printed material which comes to our homes is another question. And I think it's one which we're seeing with the work I worked on for Ocado, where we did, this is an online retail brand with no bricks, only clicks, and so we created this much more fluid, flexible system of branding. And I believe that this is the future, this sense of no stores, but a material which can be produced for us to our taste that comes to our door is one way that I think the future is going to move. So if we look at all of the different digital channels, one would imagine you would put the brand and the big idea at the heart of it, and then there's digital printing, augmented reality, the world of online retail and the Internet of Things. And one could, of course, tackle each of those silos and apply them to the big brand idea which we're ultimately all serving. I would suggest that the better approach and the exciting approach for all of us is to shuffle the deck of cards, to overlap these silos, and it's where things cross-pollinate and interrelate to each other that the genuine advances and innovations and successes of tomorrow are going to appear, and we don't even know what those overlaps are yet. And so within this talk, it feels like I've talked about anarchy. I was brought up in a culture where brand building was about consistency, it was about faithful reproduction, it was about just build the brand, build the brand, build the brand. And now I'm talking about changing things in real time, geo-specifically, personalized, customer co-created, etc., etc., etc. These are all quite big challenges. And all I would say to that point is that the real rule for success is about strong iconography on any brand. In order to be flexible in the ways I've suggested, you have to have a very strong visual backbone. And so, again, to go back to Coca-Cola, who've done a great success of this technology, you can see how the dynamic curve that Coke have has been such a great attribute for them, through which they can, through simplicity, do great storytelling and very recognizable packaging without having to try too hard. So if you have a pack which looks like anyone else's, I would argue that you're going to have less success with digital printing than if you have a truly recognizable, distinctive look and feel, which you can then exploit and explore in flexible ways. And so as I guess a piece of topicality to that, you might be familiar with the new Coca-Cola packaging, which is just being launched in Mexico. I think many people's belief is that this is a huge step backwards for Coca-Cola in terms of its strength of branding. I would be one of those people. This piece of packaging will not work as effectively for digital print through its use of iconography as what they had previously. As a point of illustration, not as of criticism of Coca-Cola by any means, they know what they're up to in life, but this isn't going to be as solid a foundation from which to flex as they previously had, I would believe. And so, what is the role of pack and branding? Within the bought media, earned media, and owned media three ways of applying life, I think we've often thought of pack as owned media. We own it anyway, and it just needs to be an awareness driver and carry our mark. I think we're now needing to move to a place where pack and branding has to be earned media. It has to get people talking about it and engaged with it. There's the analogy of the purple cow, the remarkability. If you were to drive past a field of cows, you wouldn't say much. If you saw a purple one, you'd be, oh, it's a purple cow. I think we need more purple cow packaging and branding and brand communication in life. It has to be genuinely remarkable and engaging in order to cut through in the modern world. And all I'm really trying to suggest is that digital print is one great way of doing that. So we started, I think, with Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, somewhat frightened as to how she was going to cope with this new world she'd woken up into. Of course, Dorothy didn't get to the Emerald City on her own. She had some friends who went along for the ride with her, and I think this is a really important part of what adaptation needs to be about. It's about developing stronger partnerships. None of us are necessarily experts in all of the fields we need to be to make these genuine innovations happen. Partnership's one of those words a lot of people talk about and few deliver because of egos or business interests or such like. But for us to really move forward now in life, we have to collaborate much more closely as a set of experts and individuals to make these genuine breakthroughs. They won't come from solo efforts, they will come from teamwork, cross-discipline. And diversity is the other part of this. So we started with Charles Darwin talking about the ability to adapt. He began his chain of thought on that by observing the diversity of finches on the Galapagos Islands. And he wondered, why do they all have different beaks? As well, they've all adapted to different contexts and circumstances. Now, whether you're a small brand or a big brand, whether you're a struggling challenger or you're frightened you've become old-fashioned, whether you're global, local, it doesn't matter. We all have different things that make us unique and special, and I think the big trick is to figure out as always, what makes you unique and what makes you special, and then use digital print technology as one of the ways to help amplify and accelerate that, rather than trying to just grab it in a way which doesn't focus on what you already own and what already makes you good and different. To move to my conclusion, there was a book written in the 60s called The Medium is the Massage. This was fundamentally about how mediums change communication. So, for example, film as a technique, we all learned the grammar of film. It was developed over about 50 years, and now we all understand, watching a film, that if the tension is rising, then the cutting of the film will get quicker, the music will rise, etc., etc. We haven't yet worked out what the medium is of digital print. It's still developing all around us as we speak, and I think that makes it a massive privilege, because for all of us, we can all play at developing how this medium communicates and what its grammar and its language should be, and I think it's a great time to be alive and working in our industry. So to try and sum all of this up, I believe that we need to adapt successfully to have a more experimental mindset, and we can do that via labelling things as pilot schemes rather than changing everything in a too big a way too quickly. We can be flexible to target specific moments or specific geographies or specific people. We need to combine that with the limitlessness which digital can do, so that there's diversity and variety. But the paradox in this is that the best work will be specific and limitless at the same time. We need to use formats creatively and tie up environmental print to packaging print, to book print, etc., in interesting, creative ways. And most importantly of all, I think we need to think of ways to blend analog technology with digital. So I hope some of that has made some sense to some people. For HP, I wrote a book called A Bigger Spectrum. If you were to just Google A Bigger Spectrum HP, you will see that it's available to read for free on Issuu, and maybe that might be a way to give you some further reading should you wish to. So that is the conclusion of the talk. I hope you're all still there as I've been talking into space. And I guess we now hand over to Freddie to take us through some questions.
Thanks a lot, Silas. Great presentation. So just a reminder for the audience, in order to ask questions, you can send them in by the questions widget. So just type them into the box at the top left-hand corner of your screen and click submit. So let's have a look at what we have. Silas, first question. What's the most important thing you need to make the most of digital print?
I believe that the thing you most need to start using digital print effectively is an idea, a clarity around the brand's equities and values, and then the idea which you are serving, whether it's through TV or pack or product design. Several times I've been involved in projects which almost lack an idea and yet want to use digital print, and they're never nearly as effective. So I think being clear on having a clarity on the big idea is the fundamental to any real success before you even start thinking about technology.
Thanks a lot, Silas. Next question. Someone says you mentioned HP, obviously. Is it the only option to do digital printing? And if not, which other options are available in the DP industry?
There are other options. I can only speak from personal experience because it's HP who I've been affiliated with. I think the great thing is that there are presumably all sorts of new options coming up. Presumably Drupal would be a great place to research that, which is the big trade fair which is coming up at the beginning of June. So yes, there are many other options. I can't attest to them personally, but I think the interesting places to me are also the kind of printing shops which are combining digital and analog finishing and seeing them as complementary rather than we're either analog or we're digital. It's where these two things are combining that we're getting some really interesting answers.
Great, thanks a lot. Next question. Someone says, how do I get started on a project and what are the steps?
Well, I think that pilot scheme, as I said, is a great magic word to open things up. I think also it depends, of course, on where you are in your career. It seems to me that I have the most interesting conversations talking to CMOs because they're the people who almost have the open-mindedness of seeing the opportunity here, and really it's trying to get those sort of people interested, and then it creates a need which will then be fulfilled and answered by their wider team. If you're a lone individual low down a large global organization, it's going to be tougher. But all I would argue is that if you can do something which is small and effective and doesn't look like you've been distracted from your day job, that's probably the sweet spot within this. Beyond that, go and talk to your creative agency. Have a conversation with them and talk about the creative opportunities and see what great ideas they may come up with. I think it's in everyone's interests at the moment to try and exploit this. So there's a lot of excitement latently in the topic, which can be used to help drive the business.
Great, thanks a lot, Silas. Next question. Someone says, isn't this just about a bit of a novelty, and will it be a passing thing?
Only time will tell, won't it? I personally don't believe it's the beginning of something which is going to become much more sophisticated rather than a novelty that will pass. I think we're at the very crude stage of this at the moment, much as QR codes and the like have been. It's easy to sort of get cynical very quickly, but I would imagine that as the ability for price per unit to go down increases, the demand will rise, effectiveness will drive more demand, and so I don't think it's a novelty, and I think that the best thing to do at the moment is to simply be on the journey so that one isn't suddenly finding oneself left behind. And there are so many blank spaces still to leapfrog where people currently are and do something exciting and unexpected and tactical within this.
Excellent. We've got a few questions submitted. I'll just fire them at you, Silas. Someone says, what's the most effective way to sell this concept to conservative clients?
Through return on investment that's been proven, I would suggest. If you look in the ISU book, there's some statistics in there which talk to the return on investment on that Coca-Cola project, and there are smaller ones besides. So one way of doing this is to go and actually talk to a producer such as HP, who can give you enough case studies to potentially reassure a conservative client that there is actually return on the investment and it's not merely a fool's errand. I think that deeds will speak louder than words, and there are plenty of deeds around now that can be drawn down on as case studies.
Perfect. Silas, I'll just ask these questions as they come in.
Yeah.
Someone says, there is always a perceived cost to utilizing digital print, and have you any experience in quantifying the return on investment for brands that you have worked with?
Yes and yes. So I agree there is a perceived cost, and I think it's largely true that if you're doing big runs, it becomes cheaper to move to litho. That's something which the digital print industry recognises, and I guess will ultimately level out. There's almost a sweet spot, and if you talk to the guys that do almost the number crunching at HP, they can almost give you a bell curve which shows the best return on investment in terms of run scale to what it is you're trying to achieve. So I guess there's a kind of unit cost question. However, the perceived cost is sometimes offset by the fact that there's less wastage in this digital print. If you're producing a lot of litho and it ends up in a skip behind the printers, that's not really a great use of your money, or indeed the planet's resources. So I do think that it's a complicated conversation. What I would say is simply that when this job is done right, it has brilliant return on investment. That Iron Brew project is being run, I believe, as there will be an evolution of it, for the very simple reason that they had a good return on investment. It's quick and it's impactful. And so if you're thinking of your packaging as a vessel, it's probably not worth bothering. But if you're thinking of your pack as media that you want to engage with, then return on investment is not just about an increase in sales, it's about an increase in saliency, relevance, and a perceived sense of leadership. And those are all metrics to add into this.
Great stuff. Someone says, is the security software link an HP development, or is it an HP partner?
This is the link software that I talked to, is it? I believe it's a HP development, and not being actually on the inside of HP, I couldn't tell you, to be honest, but certainly Link is something which I believe is proprietorial to HP.
Great stuff. Next question, Silas. Is there a role for haptics in modern packaging? And if yes, where might it be employed to best effect?
I don't know the answer to that. Is it all right to sometimes admit you don't know everything?
I think that's perfectly acceptable, Silas. I'm firing these questions at you as they come in.
Okay.
So
apologies.
How about this one? How do you compare lithographic to digital? And do you see a need for litho?
I think lithographic's beautiful. I think it's strong, and there is an ongoing quality debate. Depending on what day of the week and what print sample, you can argue that either one wins out in quality terms on the day. Clearly, litho is better for doing high volume at the moment. What I'm conscious of with digital is that because it allows, fundamental with litho, you will print a special, possibly, but then you'll be doing your 4-colour set. With the digital presses I've seen, you can get, I think it's 7 chambers worth of ink in there. So therefore you have a literally, physically, a wider spectrum of colour you can draw down on to get closer to desired brand colours, or indeed, say you just wanted a really powerful pink or a powerful orange, you can do that very easily through digital print white on black, things like that. So as always in life, it's about finding the right tool for the right job. I would argue that there's a complementary existence rather than a war going on between these two technologies.
Thanks, Silas. How about this one? So someone says tests in tires via social media can be checked. What about selfie graphics postings, and how can they be controlled and checked prior to be printed on the pack?
The selfies dimension. Well, I think the software is coming along for that, because you're right. It's one of those classic things that as soon as you allow people to write a rude word on a pack or print a rude image, it's going to happen. It's just life. So I believe there are softwares coming along which are almost capturing and snagging that. But it's certainly been a challenge for me on several projects I've tried to run where you're conscious it's a hostage to fortune and not in a good way. To some degree, it's about common sense on one level of people just checking it off. But if you're producing hundreds of millions of consumer-produced things, that's not practical. So it's really almost the parameters of the software for what it allows. But even when you set those in place, it can backfire. I think that something similar to that happened with one global brand where they refused to use the word gay because it was almost showing up as a red flag in their software, which clearly enraged the entire community, who would find it offensive that anyone would think that word is offensive. So tread carefully, I guess, is the bottom line of that.
Thanks, Silas. Well, we're soon out of time. Oh, perhaps one last question.
I feel sorry for whoever Patrick is, because I've noticed Patrick's got a few questions in here. I don't know if we've addressed any of them. But it's very
I believe we have.
Good.
Just a reminder to the audience, Silas will be able to get back to you personally after the webinar if your question wasn't answered. But we're just about out of time. Silas, is there anything you'd like to add before we conclude?
I guess I'd like to say thank you for anyone that's still with us. That's very, very generous of you to give your time. I hope it's been useful. I think that there is no way anyone's got all of the answers at the moment. There are more questions than answers. And so for me, I find that really exciting. There's some white space at the moment, and someone somewhere is going to have a huge success by having a sense of endeavour and a sense of experimentation. And I think we're all blessed to be working in this time at the moment that's quite fluid. I don't think it's about one thing ruling the world. It's not like Litho's dinosaur and here's the brave new world of digital. It's about being intelligent and complementary with how you utilise all of these things together. And I think we should all have fun. What a great time to be working.
Agreed. So that just leaves me to thank Silas for what was a great presentation and to thank HP for sponsoring this session. To the attendees, you'll receive an email shortly telling you how you can access the on-demand version of this webinar, or you can access this through our website, which is www.business-review-webinars.com. Once this webinar ends, today's survey will appear in its place, and we'd appreciate it if you answer the questions in there. We look forward to sharing further webinars with you, so please do keep an eye out on the website just mentioned, and follow us on Twitter at BRWebinars for daily updates, and join our LinkedIn group Business Review Webinars. Thank you once again, and I hope you all have a nice day.